She's controlled chaos. She doesn't believe in the past in a way that it restricts you. She really thinks that you've got to be honest and brave and always put yourself out there and be ugly and vulnerable. And she lives her life that way. Those are words from actor Mark Ruffalo on Jane Campion directing her 2003 film, In the Cut. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about In the Cut. The quick synopsis of the film is New York City writing professor Franny Avery has an affair with a police detective who is investigating the murder of a beautiful young woman in her neighborhood. The film stars Meg Ryan as Franny Avery, Mark Ruffalo as Detective Malloy, Jennifer Jason Leigh as Pauline, Nick D'Amici as Detective Rodriguez, Sharif Pugh as Cornelius Webb, and Kevin Bacon as John Graham. It's written by Jane Campion, Susanna Moore, and Stavros Kazantzidis. Cinematography by Dion Bibi. Directed by Jane Campion. Edited by Alexandre de Franceschi. And music by Hilmar Oren Hilmarson. Today my guest is Scott Cole. And I know Scott from the Scheisse International Film Club, actually, who's hosted by Nick. And Nick's been on the show before. This is Scott's first time. And before I get into introducing more about him, I just want to say, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. I've wanted to have you on for so long, so I'm so excited we're talking about In the Cut today.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I have a confession, which is that I listened to your show, especially the Cassavetes episodes, and I did think about December of last year, maybe November. I was like, that'd be cool to be on that show, but I was too scared to ask. And then 2 weeks later, you asked me. I was like, I think I manifested that. The secreted that. Yeah, I made it happen on my vision board. So thanks for having me.
Oh my God, that's great to hear. I love that. So it works out. I know you also write for Music City Drive-In. You do, I think it's a mix of music and film writing on there.
It's all movies. They just call it just because Nashville is considered Music City. I think that's just for the title. They call it Music City. But yeah, it's all film stuff. I haven't written from them in a minute because I'm actually in software development school right now. So that's taking up all my time. But I hope to get back to it very soon. My last review is of Woody Harrelson's Champions. I'm like, I need to put something to replace that one.
I mean, hey, listen, at least you've been doing some writing that's more than most. So I highly recommend people check that out. But I'm curious to know, your kind of journey with cinema. I know we follow each other on Letterboxd along with being in the film club too. And you watch a lot of films. And do you recall when you first started watching films in more of a serious way, where you started seeking out like older films or films from other regions around the world?
For me, the big way in there was Siskel and Ebert. I was a big Siskel and Ebert fan. It came on here like 11 or 12:30 in the morning on Sunday, so I would record it and watch it the next day. But I really got into them, and they would bring on, of course they covered like the big movies, but they would also cover small independent movies, foreign films, and they would have like segments on older movies. But really the stuff that I would say probably when I was around 13 or 14, I started wanting to seek out indie movies that they had talked about. They were only playing at one theater kind of across town. And sometimes I would talk my parents into taking me over there to see those, but not all the time. But then when they would come out on video, I could rent, like there'd be one copy of that one at Hollywood Video. And when there's like a million copies of Twister, they'd be like one of one of Secrets and Lies. That's good from that time period. But yeah, that was kind of it. Like I would really credit them and like Roger Ebert's writing, particularly with getting me into film in a more serious way. And then ever since then, it's sort of shifted now. I almost prefer the more obscure movies to the big blockbuster, although blockbusters have changed a lot of what they are lately. So it's understandable to see, I think, a little bit why I'm not as into them. But anyway, that's kind of how it went for me.
That's cool. I knew that you liked Siskel and Ebert, and I specifically wanted to read Ebert's review of this film, which we'll talk about. He wasn't the biggest fan.
Right.
And I have an interesting quote that he mentioned about Meg Ryan's character in this. So we'll save it. But
oh Lord,
I think that's a really good way. I remember watching some of their shows too and discovering some indie films that I found were really interesting that I probably wouldn't have heard of if they hadn't talked about it. So they definitely were important.
Yeah, it's like before that, they didn't really talk about that kind. Like they really brought. I just finished reading the book that Matt Singer wrote about their history, which is really interesting. And it's like that's just the first time that stuff like that was even talked about on like
Yeah.
that a person who lived like in the Midwest didn't really have access to movies like that before Siskel and Ebert would talk about them on their show. So it's kind of interesting.
We always need that. In terms of Jane Campion, would you consider yourself a fan of her work, or is this just like a one-off one that you really enjoy, or do you like most of her films?
I'm a fan. I like most of everything I've seen. I would say I've seen maybe like five of them. So there are a few
Mhm.
I'm missing that I need to see. I did watch Holy Smoke for this because I had not seen it, and it's the first one I would say I was not crazy about. It's I don't hate it. I think it's interesting. I think it's just a kind of a mess, but that was the first one that. But I think from what I understand, it harkens back a little bit to some of her early movies, like especially the comedic style of like the first hour of it. So I
Yeah.
don't have the reference for that. So I need to go back and watch her early films. The Piano was my first way in because my sister really liked that movie. She's a couple years older than me. And I watched it when I was like 13 or 14. And I remember loving it, but then I hadn't seen it in forever. And I watched it just like a month or two ago, finally again, because I got the Criterion. Yeah, it's an incredible movie. Yeah, I was blown away by it. I didn't remember that much of it because it had been such a long time. So it was almost like finding it again for the first time. And The
Yeah.
Power of the Dog was like my favorite movie of a couple years ago. I think that's a masterpiece, pretty much. Yeah, yeah,
It really is.
yeah. There's nothing wrong with that movie.
No, there really isn't. Like that truly was. I found that year to be a bit rough for film, at least for me, but that was like the standout.
Yeah, I just remember people kept saying like, "Whoa, Benedict Cumberbatch is so
Hmm.
miscast." I'm like, that's the point. I would get so mad.
Yeah.
Like he's not supposed to be like yeah, he's playing a part in the movie. Like I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very meta in that way.
Exactly. I mean, I thought he was great in it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. For In the Cut, though, do you recall the first time you watched it and like what your initial thoughts were on that first watch?
When the movie first came out, I was perhaps too much of a disciple of critics in Ebert, and I remember he gave it a negative
Hmm.
review, as did a lot of critics, which now is crazy to me looking back at it. So I didn't really give them. I didn't even see it back then. I think I just skipped it. I was like, oh, this probably isn't very good. But I finally watched it maybe like 3 years ago, because it was on Netflix, I think, and I was like, I never saw this, and I felt like I remember hearing some people say it's better than it got credit for being. So I watched it, and I thought it was excellent. Like I was really, really impressed by it. Particularly like the tone of it. It's so specific and like the cinematography and the way that just the tone of
Hmm.
like kind of dread and foreboding that's by the handheld like shaky camera work and the lighting and stuff.
Hmm.
It's really specific and like you can tell a lot of work went into it. And I was surprised it was dismissed the way it was, but I think there were a lot of other reasons why, which are stupid. But yeah, but I really, really was impressed by it. And also specifically, I still think Meg Ryan is incredible in this movie.
Oh yeah.
Maybe the best Meg Ryan performance, possibly. I mean, it's so good. But yeah, so I first watched it a couple years ago. Then this was my second time, and I liked it still. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, I think I also watched it for the first time maybe 2 or 3 years ago, knowing about it and knowing that people had been harsh on it, and then having a couple friends being like, "No, you really have to watch it." Because when I was starting to get more into Campion's work, I was like, "Okay." I don't think I even knew originally that it was a Campion film. I just knew Meg Ryan was in it, and just the first time watching it, being shocked because it was so good, but also the contents of the film, I was like, "Wow, okay."
Yeah,
Wasn't expecting any of this.
yeah. It reminds me of like I can see why it was surprising to people. There was nothing
Hmm.
coming out of Hollywood like this, really, like in this way. There were movies with sexual content, but they're not treated the way this is. Like this reminds me more of like a foreign film or a French film. It's like so, yeah. It's more thoughtful about sex, and they actually talk about sex in this movie, and it's like that just doesn't happen in Hollywood movies ever. So it's I can see people are like, whoa, what's this? Like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah, especially even in 2003 when this film did
yeah.
come out. Well, if you're ready, because you actually just mentioned my first point, so we might as well segue into the chat about the film. One of the first points I wanted to talk about was kind of the concept of the erotic thriller and what we've known about that genre and Campion's take on it. prefacing the fact that this is based on a book, but the script is co-written by Campion and the writer of the novel, Susanna Moore. When I think of erotic thrillers, you think of stuff like Basic Instinct, Fatal Attraction, Body Double, all these male directors doing. I love all those movies. I think they're all great erotic thrillers, but we have that vision of one, and then this one, it's an erotic thriller, but I don't know that it's a sexy erotic thriller versus the other ones. How do you feel about that genre? Are you a fan of that genre and the Jane Campion's take on it?
Yeah. I like those movies too. I've always been like a fan of like Fatal Attraction. I guess you would say specifically the Verhoeven stuff. Well, no, it's I guess Basic Instinct is his only. I don't know. Oh, Joe Esterhaus, who I'm thinking of, because he wrote several of them, and he wrote Basic
Mm,
Instinct. But yeah, Jagged Edge and all that stuff. They're always.
yeah.
I do have like a soft spot for those because they're nostalgic in a way because they just seem kind of old fashioned now. I would say like in those the difference to me is like it feels like in all of those that are male directors, it's the sex is being used to spice up the murder aspect or to like get it. Yeah, like Basic Instinct, like the whole thing is they're having sex, but you never know if she's gonna kill him or not during sex. Like it's just
Hmm.
sort of like it's a way to like spice things up. And this one, it's almost like there's a murder mystery, and then there's also this weird side relationship where they seem like equal parts intrigued and irritated by each other, but they're also having pretty interesting sex together. But it doesn't really, it's not correlated exactly to the
Mm.
killing and the murder. The murder is almost ancillary to that at the points in the movie when they focus on the sexual content. If I could ask, did you watch the R-rated or the unrated version of this?
Um, I don't know actually.
Well, I think so. The first time I'm sure I watched the R-rated because it was on Netflix, but I have the unrated. I didn't realize it. But in that first scene at the bar with the with the blowjob at the bar,
Yeah.
there's an extreme close up, and I was like, "This cannot
Okay.
be the R-rated version."
Yeah, I've seen that version then.
Okay, okay. I was like, I know this wasn't in the R-rated, but yeah, I was like, oh yeah, and then I checked my box and it said unrated. I was like, okay, all right, gotcha. Anyway, I was just curious which one because yeah, it took me by surprise. From I was like, oh, okay, wow, okay, this is unrated. Yeah,
Yeah, both times I watched that version, I didn't realize they had censored it a bit in another version of it. I guess makes sense. I did read that when they do the close up bit, it's a prop, obviously.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they didn't go brown bunny version on this one.
They didn't make what Nick Demichi do a full frontal like close up.
Not like that. Yeah, it is interesting what you said about the sex is kind of as a way to spice up the murders where these are kind of separate. Like she is intrigued to find out more because she's now really deep in the story because she thinks she saw the person who might have murdered the girl who died and her body was found basically outside of her apartment. So she's like, how am I being tied to this? But I don't think she's using sex as a way to get information. That just happens to be she's also getting information and she's having sex with the person who has, who's leading the
Yeah,
investigation. So it is interesting and it's an interesting take on the genre because, as you said, we really don't get those anymore. In the last couple of years, they've been trying to bring it back and it just seems to not succeed. I haven't really seen any of the new ones, but I haven't heard of any that have done really well. When I was reading about this one, Gone Girl comes up quite often. I hadn't thought of Gone Girl as an erotic thriller. I guess it kind of is. Maybe if you, depending on how you read it. I don't know that I would call it that myself, but I could see people
yeah,
comparing the two.
yeah. Gone Girl. I love David Fincher, but there's
Hmm.
something that's so cold about David Fincher's aesthetic that to me, I can't imagine him making anything sexy. Like it just,
Yeah.
yeah, it feels a little too, yeah, clinical, cold to the touch. I don't know. I think, yeah, and that I guess again pours into like why this is interesting being from Jane Campion's perspective, a female. They just the fact that after they have sex, they talk about it a little bit, like is interesting to me
Hmm.
that they like that's an interesting choice. Like she wants him to explain how he knows how to do what he did. Like just that whole storyline. It's just stuff that I feel like would have been cut out of a lot of other movies. Here adds a lot to it. And also the characters are they're not the easiest characters to get. They're not difficult. Well, I don't want to say difficult because that sounds like a try to say Meg Ryan's character is difficult, but she's
Hmm.
just not overly friendly. She's kind of standoffish, and it takes work to like get into her sort of like as far as her headspace, which I think is great. But I could
Yeah.
see at the time probably that had a lot to do with why people were like, well, they're not making it easy for me to like the protagonist. So what, all that bullshit. But anyway, I think that's an interesting way to learn more about her character and his is the way that they use sex in that way.
I just love the way the characters were written because they seem very honest. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
you may not relate to them. It's weird because I think when people are watching movies, they expect characters to be a certain way, but not too real. And when they are super real, they're like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting that and I can't relate to that, despite the fact that you probably know someone who's exactly like this person.
That's true. They're both like they're so realistic and they don't lie to each other. Except the problem
Mhm.
is she thinks he's all lies. She thinks he's totally bullshitting her the whole time and he's actually not. So it's an interesting like push and pull there.
As you've mentioned, and I totally agree. And I think the film is getting, I don't know if it's been fully reevaluated yet by audiences, but it's getting there. I've been seeing more screening of it happen around and just more people talking about it. But when people do talk about it, it's always about Meg Ryan's performance. And it is great, especially if you've seen Meg Ryan in any other film. And then you see this one, she just looks different. She looks like a stripped down, probably just regular version of herself. And she, as you said, is very standoffish in this, and she seems very aloof. And you're wondering, why is she putting herself in this situation? What's the deal with her? And I love that. And before we even get into her performance, originally this was supposed to be Nicole Kidman's role because her and Campion are good friends. They've worked together before. But it happens to be that she was divorcing Tom Cruise at the time, and she was like, "This is going to be too much for me," which is totally fair.
Yeah.
So she's a producer on the film, but the role went to Meg Ryan, and I thought that that's super interesting casting. And I think that Meg Ryan really got a bad rap with that because I don't
Mhm.
know that her career even really kind of recovered after it, which is really unfortunate. How do you feel about just the casting of Meg Ryan and what she does in this role?
I agree that she got a bad rap because yeah, it kind of did almost destroy her career in a way, which is really annoying because she's really good at romantic comedies, so therefore she has to do that the rest of her life. Like she was
Yeah,
penalized almost for making a choice and doing like with a great direct like a renowned director. It's not like she was I mean, she probably felt like she was in safe hands because
yeah.
Campion obviously knows what she's doing and she's a great director. But of course they turned like everything turned on her. But I thought it was great casting. I have trouble picturing Nicole Kidman in this. Like I think that there's something about Meg Ryan that's very believable in this movie, especially as a teacher to me, like an English teacher. She just really is convincing in that part. I like the running thing about the poetry on the subway.
Mm-hmm.
I like how it looks like a real subway, but I like how it feels like it's real New York. But anyway, there is a one side thing is there's a shot when they're driving down Chinatown, and there's like a shot of the car going down. And I saw the restaurant I went to when I visited last May,
Oh
so I was
yeah.
like, "There's Wo Hop." Yeah, it was the restaurant I went to in Chinatown, so I was excited. But anyway, it feels like real New York. But I think she brings a lot to the role because she doesn't make everything clear. There's a lot obviously
Mhm.
going on. She's doing a lot of character work. I feel like even the way she reacts to things, like I feel like when you watch the scene where she comes in, this is skipping way ahead, but when she comes
That's
into
good.
her sister's apartment and finds something going on there,
Hmm.
something bad, I think the way she reacts to that on her face is just so there's just so much in her face that I'm just like I'm sure Nicole Kidman would have been fine, probably great. I have trouble seeing it for some reason. I don't know why, but probably because Meg Ryan does such a good job. I guess that's a testament to her.
Exactly. I do like the way she reacts to things, and I like the relationship she has with the people in the films, but especially Jennifer Jason Leigh, who plays her sister,
Yeah.
Pauline. When you see the two of them when they first meet on screen and they're walking down the street talking, like I would just assume they're sisters.
Hmm.
They just have such a great rapport together. And Jennifer Jason Leigh is very much the type who would be in this movie. Like you don't question her the way people would have questioned Meg Ryan. You're like, yeah,
Right.
this is very much Jennifer Jason Leigh. And she's great in this movie too. What I noticed is the way the two women were shot because she's not trying to make them look unflattering, but she's not trying to make them look more attractive than their characters are supposed to be. Because there's certain clothing that they're wearing in certain ways that they're shot that just seems so real. And you're like, oh, they just seem like regular women
Hmm.
on the street walking around as opposed to movie stars in this role. And I really appreciate that. I always
Yeah.
talk about to people, I'm like, I don't know when it was. Like it must have been like late 90s, early 2000s where actors were no longer allowed to just look like human beings. Like they
Yeah.
just were not allowed to look ugly at any point, unless it was like calling for this big Oscar role where they're supposed to be ugly. But now just everyone looks like cut out versions of, models and so on. So,
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. Like they have that is kind of a cute scene when she's sitting there talking to her, and she's like, "Are you gonna go out with that detective?" And she's like, "I don't know." And she goes, "Do you want to borrow something cute to wear?" And she's like, "Yeah, will you come with me?" Like they're like go through the closet. It's just
mhm,
like that sisterly relationship feels very real.
yeah.
I read that Meg Ryan said that they like gave each other gifts in real life, like as the characters to try to like build a
Mm,
relationship, like character gifts they thought the characters would give each other. It just comes across like you like you say, you do feel like they're sisters.
mhm.
Jennifer Jason Leigh, as you said, like she would not have gotten flack for being in this movie because she'd made riskier projects. Not even risky, because Meg Ryan had done like people forget she did like When a Man Loves a Woman. Like she's done hard drama before. It's just what people know her as is to her detriment somehow of being like with Tom Hanks in a romantic comedy, that sort of thing. But I agree with you. They look like real people, and I think a lot of that also. I keep bringing up the lighting, but the way the movie is like lit and shot is very realistic. Like even the way Kevin Bacon looks in it is, which
Yes.
a crazy uncredited cameo. Who's great. I think he's great in it. But yeah, he just looks very like you almost don't recognize it's him at first. He's very stripped down and he's in scrubs. Yeah, that sort of thing. So
Kevin Bacon, actually, yeah, let's talk about him for a sec. Because
so
when he
creepy.
first came on screen, I was like, wait a minute, is that Kevin Bacon? Did not know he was in this movie. And he's so chaotic,
Mhm.
like pure chaos. He's walking around with that little dog and he's just like pacing back and forth and like stalking her. And then when he has that freak out where she's like, yeah, I don't think we should see each other. And she handles it so well. Her character handles it so well where she's just like, okay. And that just shows that this is a woman who's used to men kind of blowing up on her. And she's like, okay, this is just another one. I know how to handle this. And it's kind of sad that she's so used to it. But that's a great performance by him. I didn't fully realize that it was uncredited until on this watch. I'm wondering why. I couldn't find any information on why it was uncredited because he's had in a few scenes. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just like a quick flash of Kevin Bacon. So I don't know, maybe he did it as a favor.
Maybe you would think that he'd want to be credited in a Campion movie, but no, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's what I would think so.
but it's like maybe they were trying to go for an element of surprise there because it is kind of a shock when you realize who it is. But
Yeah.
I agree though that when he screams at her on the street in that scene, like that's a good scene where her reaction is interesting because like she's wearing her
Hmm.
sunglasses because she has the black eye, but like you
Yeah.
can tell it bothers her, but she's like trying to keep a lid on it. She's just like you said, just like get through this. Just well, let's just get through it. Meanwhile, he's threatening to like put his dog down. He's doing all these crazy tricks to try to get power, and it's just yeah, it's awful.
It really is. Before I move on, because I do want to talk about the cinematography as well, because I think it's really beautiful and very interesting for this story. But I did want to just mention a very quick quote that Roger Ebert said about
Okay.
Franny. And he said that she basically droops around as if she's on hog tranquilizers the whole time. He was complaining about her reactions to everything. He's like, why is she just like seem like she doesn't care about anything and she's just prancing around super slowly, just like moving very slowly around the rooms. And it's like, because she's got a lot going on
Mhm.
in her life. She's thinking. I think that she's very much a thinker. And you see that even when she's just looking around her small apartment where she slowly walks around. She's looking at her fridge and she's looking at pictures and she's just taking things in. It's a quick enough movie. I don't remember how long it is. It feels quick to me, but she's not moving as though this is a quick paced lifestyle for her,
Yeah.
despite the fact that she's does live somewhat of a chaotic life.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really hated her character.
I mean, that's interesting because so that kind of ties in with something a big point I kept thinking about was the pace of it is like it is kind of meandering in a way. Like it's not boring or not like I don't think she acts like she's on tranquilizers. I think she's just like you said, reacting to things with a while thinking some of the stuff that happens later in the movie, she's reacting to almost like real time trauma, like things that are
Yeah,
happening to her in the moment and she's trying to process them and it's too much. I feel like the movie it is a thriller about a murderer, but it
mhm,
to compare it to something like Seven or Copycat or something is wrong
yeah,
because those have such a quick pace to them and it's only about the murder. Like this one feels like there's a murder, but also there's life going on, and that life takes the time that life takes. and
Hmm.
that's going to happen too. So you just, obviously it's not, yeah, it doesn't feel like a driven like bullet train going through the murder story at all. But I like that part of it. So yeah, but he was
Same.
a little rough there on her. I feel like to be honest, I did not. I mean, I noticed the pace of the movie is a little. I can't even think of the right word, but because every word I'm thinking of sounds bad. I don't mean lethargic as a bad word. I just
No,
mean it
yeah, I
takes
know what
its
you mean.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I did not notice anything in her performance where I felt like she was being weird or not reactive enough. Or I feel like Egbert had just seen too many movies by that point. He knew the conventions of
Yeah.
every movie. Everybody's got to scream every time something happens in the moment. I don't know. Yeah,
Hmm.
he's just too much. I'm sorry he wrote that. I feel defensive about Egbert.
I kind of viewed it, her reactions kind of just being like, this is someone who lives in New York. She's seen a lot of shit. She's been through a lot of shit. So she's not going to overreact to anything because this is like just another day in her life,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So for her to just be out of character and be dramatic about it would seem off-putting. So I think it's a good choice. But the cinematography in the film, which we've mentioned before, there is kind of that orange, kind of yellow and reds that come out a lot. And the shaky camera that we get of those early 2000s films, which I think is very much of its time, but it works for
Hmm.
this because the story calls for that. But the coloring of it, I was reading on Senses of Cinema, the writer was talking about how it looks like it's kind of being shot through like a rose tinted glass. And there's
Hmm.
that dewy look to it. And I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking. I didn't have the words for it. So I will credit this person in the show
Yeah.
notes for that. But I thought that was really interesting because we open up with the Que Sera Sera song as the credits are rolling and it's the kind of shots of New York and people walking around with that filtering and the coloring. And when you finally meet Franny and Pauline and you get those flashbacks of their parents, the story that they tell, they kind of have this very childlike demeanor. And I
Hmm.
think the coloring mirrors that because as much as they are living hard enough lives, I think there's an innocence to them where they're really just, as most people are, just trying to find love and happiness. And I think that reflects really well with the coloring. So how do you feel about the fact that that choice, because it's very much a distinct choice to make the film look this way?
Yeah, that is interesting that they said that thing about because I was thinking in my head when I was watching it, it reminded me of like church stained glass in church. Sort of
Hmm.
like if you were looking through a yellow piece of stained glass, it kind of has that. Like it's all, yeah, it's very yellow. Most of its lighting, like just piercing light coming in through a window, just strips of light, like nothing consistent. I like that choice. I feel like it gives the movie a sense of unease and it makes it
Yeah.
feel like kind of a dirty, grimy New York that I feel like movies don't sometimes capture some like it just feels real in a way that yeah, sometimes movies when they show New York show it. Like I for some reason I keep thinking of Home Alone 2. Just like idealized New York, perfect Plaza Hotel. Like we're like, yeah, we're down and dirty here in New York a little bit. I think but yeah, I think that those choices are good. The shaky cam stuff, I feel like it's not overused, but it's used enough where it is sort of unsettling and you're like you're trying to get your bearings. When you mentioned that it's of the time, I do have to bring up that Jane Campion was a little bit of a victim of falling prey to font and typeface of the time.
Yeah.
Um, Holy smoke, unbelievable! Like the Matrix style titles, and this one, it's that weird kind of like papyrus,
Yeah, I know.
but it made me feel nostalgic though. I was like, yes, I remember people were using this all the time back then. This was like my font on AOL Instant Messenger. But no, but yeah, I think that the way it's shot goes a long way to establishing the mood and the tone, which is appropriately upsetting.
Very much. I had forgotten about the font in this one because every time, or the last two times watching it, I'm always like, oh yeah, remember that? And we used to do that. I don't know
Yeah.
why, like why we stopped doing that, or even just different color font.
Yeah, it's kind of nice in a way. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like a chance people wouldn't take anymore.
Now, hopefully, I don't know, maybe there'll be a new resurgence of younger
That'd be good.
generation who's like, oh, I'm nostalgic for early 2000s cinema.
Yeah.
Holy smoke, though, I noticed that very much. Where I
Oh,
was like, yep,
I gasped when
yeah,
I saw it. I was like, oh my God, like that
yeah.
green matrix text. I was shocked. I was like, wow, okay.
Time capsule for sure. But in terms of the cinematography, like as you said, it does mirror how unsettling the film is because I feel like there are a few times where you start to feel a bit comfortable, when she's talking to her sister, or even when she's teaching. You get a very brief scenes where she's teaching, or she's just walking around where you're like, okay, I'm starting to settle in, but then something happens where you're like, nope, you're not supposed to be settled. You're not supposed to feel comfortable right now. And I like just that choice of making the film look that way because
Yeah.
I don't know how much it would still would have worked if it was just shot regularly, but I think it was the right choice to make it look this way.
It adds a lot. Yeah. I feel like it does.
This is a film that and story the book, it's essentially in multiple different ways, more overt and more behind the scenes about the violence on women. And we see that happen primarily to Franny in different ways from different people. And then we'll get into it as we talk about this section, what happens to Pauline. But in terms of Franny, she's essentially has like four different men that we see who are aggressive towards her.
Mhm.
Malloy, played by Mark Ruffalo, is aggressive in a way where you're not sure what the deal is because you don't trust him the same way that Franny doesn't. Like, at least I didn't. I was like, this man is definitely lying.
I
Like, he's
agree.
done
Yeah.
something where I'm like, I don't trust him. And he plays it that way where you're not supposed to believe a single word he's saying. They do have a relationship, but he's still aggressive in a certain way towards her. We've got her student who she's tutoring on the side as well, and they have a great relationship, and he is aggressive towards her verbally, just in a playful way at first, but then there's a scene where he does eventually visit her at her apartment and he does get more physically violent. That scene was really unfortunate to me because I remember the first time being like, oh man, I really wish it hadn't gone that way with that character. But you
Yeah.
kind of see it at the beginning. And then there's also Rodriguez, Malloy's partner, and his just verbal aggression towards her when they first meet at the bar. And then as you see later on, then we've talked about Kevin Bacon's character, John Graham, and his aggression. So there's a woman who's got a lot going on and a lot of men treating her badly in different ways, and she's holding her own, but it's a lot for her. How do you feel about that? Do you find that it's a bit overkill? Do you find it gratuitous, or do you think that this is like a realistic portrayal of how these men would actually treat a woman?
I do agree with you that I don't think the Cornelius part adds much to the movie. I wish that maybe hadn't been there. Although I will say that I do think the way she grieves, so she has nowhere to go. The
Mm-hmm.
guy, whoever mugged her, has her apartment information. Then Pauline, she's staying with Pauline. Whatever happens to Pauline happens there. So she has nowhere to go. So she just goes home and gets hammered. I mean, that felt realistic to me in a way. Like if you were just out of options, you were scared, you were that sad, she just goes home and gets drunk. I mean, just to forget about everything. I was like, that actually sounds. I mean, it just felt like how a real person might handle it if they were like out of options. The thing about Ruffalo's character is interesting is like he is trying to. It's like he's always trying to keep her on her toes. Like when they're in the
Mm-hmm.
bar talking, he's talking normally to her, and then I can't remember what her line is, but at one point he switches and he's like, "Listen, lady," like and says something like he just switches. He like can switch on a
Yeah.
dime and try to like antagonize her, and she looks so thrown by it, but she's intrigued by it. It's
Yeah.
weird, but I also think they overdo the cop banter between him and Rodriguez. Like it comes on so fast and fierce. They keep doing it like the hey, what's up, man? Da, 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 like get ribbing each other's stuff. It gets a little silly at times, but I also think there's a scene where she's in the classroom teaching. I think it's Cornelius is there. He's looking at her. He can see that she's
Mm-hmm.
been hurt. And then you just have these cutaways to Mark Ruffalo wandering up and down the aisle going, hey, what do you know about this Cornelius Webb? Where's Franny Avery's room? Is this it? Like he's just being so loud, and you're just like, it's a little much. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like the ADR is out of control in that part, but it is weird to think about how aggressive they are towards her, especially like in the scene, even that first scene where Ruffalo comes to visit her, she gets the
Mm-hmm.
phone call from Bacon on the machine, and he's being
Yeah.
aggressive in that. It's like she doesn't have any reprieve from that, except for when she's with Pauline. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right; those scenes are like a nice oasis. You're just like, thank God, there's finally something they
Yeah.
can talk about their lives, talk about everything, be sisters together. But it is a lot. I didn't feel like it was overkill that they're but it is a lot that there's all these guys are so
Yeah.
aggressive, and then when she gets mugged or whatever, and then the cab hits her and he goes, "I didn't hit you." The cab driver says, "I didn't hit you, but I'll take you where you need to go." It's just crazy. Yeah, so much is happening to her in such a short time. I can see where it's real time trauma response, just like trying to make
Hmm.
it through.
That's exactly that. I
Mhm.
think that's the strength in this story is that she is responding the way a real person would. Because imagine being mugged and like kind of stumbling into the street and you immediately get hit by a car. I would just be like, well, I'm just gonna lie here now
Yeah, just lay down
because
and be done.
like I'm done now for the night, possibly for the year. But such a New York thing to just be like, I didn't actually hit you, like,
Yeah,
sir. We all saw it happen. Like there's people outside, they all saw it happen. But like just like that response of just being in such shock that she just gets up and she's like, no, I just gotta get home. Like I just don't want to be here right now. Which I think is really strong. Malloy is such an interesting character because at this point, I'm trying to think at this point in Mark Ruffalo's career, he's known enough. He's not as big as he is now, but I think he still had some films that were known enough. I don't even know what year was my God, Zodiac. Was it around this time?
Zodiac was '07.
Oh, okay, it's later. Okay.
Kind of what I remember about Ruffalo was he burst on the scene big time, and You Can Count on Me in 2000,
Yeah.
which is great. He's great in that movie. I love that movie. And then he was like, I think he was lined up for a lot of projects, but then he got sick and had to back
Yeah.
out of a lot of projects. And I think that almost put his career on ice for a couple of years until Zodiac, kind of, until he started. And The Kids Are All Right. Like he got traction again, and then of course Marvel. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think he was supposed to be lined up for a bunch of projects, but I think he had like a brain tumor. He had to have operate
Yeah.
on. It took him out for a while. I think that sort of sidetracked his plans, or whatever that Hollywood's plans for him were. Let's put it that way. But yeah, so I can't think of what he made but that's only a couple of years between this and You Can Count on Me. I mean, I know he made a few movies, but
Yeah. He was in Margaret also.
oh
I don't know if
yeah,
you've
he's great
seen
in
that.
Margaret. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what year that was. That must have been like early 2000s also.
Yeah, because it was filmed a while before it came out too. Maybe mid 2000s, maybe somewhere around this time, I think.
Yeah.
Another movie that feels like New York. Another movie that's realistically New York.
Yeah, Margaret is a trip. Oh, Margaret. Okay, so it came out in 2011, but obviously would have been filmed before that.
Yeah, he was in like legal battles for a long time. It was probably filmed in like '04 or '05 or something like that.
That's a very interesting movie too.
Hmm.
But his character in this is just so interesting to watch because he's so abrasive and he really does his best to make you not like him.
Hmm.
And even at the end, I still am just like, I don't like this guy, even if he didn't do it. But then you can kind of see because Meg Ryan does such a great role with Franny, you can see why she does like him. And I don't know that it's love, but she does feel some sort of comfort in him, maybe because she realizes at this point that he was just being his true self and this is who he is, and
Hmm.
you're not going to get a change from him.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Very complex characters, the both of them.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like the one thing that I was seeing parallel, or like the constant in most of the Jane Campion films I've seen, specifically like the piano holy smoke in this, is
Hmm.
she seems very interested in a sexual relationship when there's a power imbalance
Yep.
involved,
Hmm.
when one has the upper hand or is supposed to, and how what that does. Obviously that's the piano big time, and then holy smoke becomes about that entirely in a way. But yeah, that is interesting that she keeps. I like when filmmakers sort of have. Some people complain when they like do similar things, but I kind of like when they continue to work out a similar
Oh,
thought
same.
process. Or yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think I guess Power of the Dog sort of has that too, maybe. Yeah, but it's interesting to me. Like I just noticed that, and I was like, it's interesting that she keeps going back to sort that out, like how that affects the rest of a relationship or the rest of a life,
Hmm.
sort of. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting to me.
No, I love that too. I love when directors are like, and director writers, especially who are like, I have one thing I'm really interested in and I'm going to explore it. So
Yeah.
I talked about that in my Bergman series where Bergman has like 2 to 3 things he likes to talk about and he's done like 50 movies about it.
Yeah.
But he does it well. It's like, if I know one thing really well, I might as well keep doing it. You can just write different stories about it. So I like that this is a very specific thing that she's interested in, and you do see it. But then all the films are super different, but there
Right.
is that similarity throughout. So I really like that. And then when this book came out, it was a pretty big hit because it was abrasive and it's written by a woman, Susanna Moore, who had been writing a bunch of stuff, but she was being labeled as like a female writer and she felt boxed in by that. So she wanted to write a noir thriller specifically. And she'd been working at women's shelters and different centers, addiction centers, and seeing the violence that was, happening to all these women. To use that as inspiration for this book. She was like, I just want to write something that's really honest about like the sense of, powerlessness and that the fact that there's really nothing that these characters can do. There's nothing that Meg Ryan could have done differently to change a situation. And there's nothing that Pauline could have done differently to change a situation. So, and I like that she wrote this along with Campion. So you still have her voice in that. And I think that's what makes it. I haven't read the book yet. I know that there is a slightly different ending. I know what the ending is. So I don't want to spoil it for people, but I am interested to read the book because I wonder how abrasive it is.
Yeah, I heard what the ending was. I won't say it, but that's just like, I mean, it fits with the bleak view of this movie almost. It's like, yeah, that is an interesting. I'd be curious to read that book too and just see what the differences are. See if they managed to capture my guess would be they captured the feeling well, because this, like when I think about Campion movies, I think about usually the ones that are beautifully set in like a vista, or like the plains, the fields, like or the edge of the earth, like the piano, or like she's so good at filming landscape. That's the word I'm looking for. That it's interesting that she does such a, I mean, it's really cool that she does such a convincing job in a city setting, giving it this gritty, real life feel. But yes, it is very foreboding at times. And it is sad, like you're saying about they can't change their circumstance. You do get a weird feeling watching this, like a sad feeling, like they're just living their lives, but it's bad stuff's going to happen to them, and you can't help. There's nothing they can do to help themselves. Really, it's just really depressing to think about.
I especially felt for Pauline. We've kind of danced around her ending, but throughout, Pauline is talking about this man that she's seeing, and the man is unavailable, but they're still seeing each other. You get an uneasy feeling about it, and so you can see that Franny is just trying to, not tell her not to be with this man, but doesn't trust the situation. And she comes to a very unfortunate end. It's very gruesome that Franny walks in on, of just, she literally is decapitated. And it's very shocking, especially because at this point, there's so much happening to Franny that not that I forgot about Pauline, but I just wasn't expecting anything to happen to her.
Yeah. Well, in that scene, it is weird because it's just like, just another shitty day for Franny, and she's going home. She's just like, yeah, okay, I'm going home to my sister's crappy apartment above the strip club, which is the front man is Patrice O'Neill, the comedian. That's great. He's so good in it too. I was like, oh, he's got a good little part there. It's just her going home for the day. Like, okay, well, things have been crappy again today, and then she goes upstairs, and it's like she wants Malloy, Ruffalo's character, to explain to her what happened, but then of course he doesn't have tact. He gives her the most gruesome rundown of what happened to her sister. It's just like, I mean, she said she wanted to hear it, but I don't know. I was just like, the way he said it, I was like, you don't have to get this, because it makes it so much more upsetting when he describes it. You're just like, oh my gosh. But
zero filter.
Yeah, there's not many moments in the movie. It kind of reminds me of Seven in this way. You don't see murders happening. You see aftermath a few times, and it is like very grisly and upsetting, and it's graphic, but just in like short bursts, and never while it's not like about the murder, it's more like what the murder, aftermath. So that kind of reminded me of that Seven in that way, the way it's handles the murder stuff.
Yeah, because we never actually see any real violence,
which is the right choice, I think. Yeah,
because then it is labeled as a thriller, and there is thriller aspects to it, but it's not supposed to be a horror also.
Yeah.
The horror is just the life that they're living, unfortunately.
Just what's happening every day. Yeah.
We've talked about New York. This is a New York film, and the book was set and written in the 90s, but by the time this is made, this is released in 2003, so it would have been filmed 2001, 2002. So this is essentially a post 9/11 New York. And I think that you can very much feel it in this film, because everyone's very sluggish in this, and everyone there's like a depression running through the air. It is a very grimy New York, and I don't think it's griming it up. I think that anyone who's been to New York can know that it's a great city, but it's also kind of gross. Like it's
Yeah.
really gross and dirty. And I hadn't thought about that until I read someone say this is like a post 9/11 New York film. And I was like, okay, yes, I can feel that in the air. I don't know if you did watching it.
Well, I did, and there's not, especially because they're so like they're in like lower New York, lower Manhattan, like Chinatown and
Hmm.
those areas, like the areas around the bridges. So that feels even more like because of how close it is to the battery. But there is that one shot that I caught that I never noticed. I didn't notice the first time I saw it, but I think it's she's coming up the subway stairs, and they just cut to a shot of an American flag hanging on a building. And that was like, I was like, that makes sense. That's giving it this 9/11 post 9/11 feel.
Yeah.
You can just tell that's why the flag was there. I'm not sure what it was about it, but something about it. You're like, this is like a 9/11 response.
Yeah.
I do feel that. And I didn't think about the sluggishness of like, or the way people are responding, but that does add up. Why, yeah, there's less excitement for day-to-day life. Everybody just feels like they're trudging through the motions, kind of like, all right, here we go. Yeah, but that, I mean, that makes total sense to me that it would be kind of that post 9/11 story.
I just noticed it especially on this watch where even the background actors, everyone just seems like they're like just drained from
Yeah.
life. And I assume it was summer, but it didn't look like it was like super hot summer. But it just seemed like it wasn't a good time for anyone.
I was going to ask you something. I thought about one thing when we were talking about Pauline, and I forgot to ask. I think it's interesting that the movie starts with Pauline at the very beginning. Did you know? Like, I don't know what I think of that. I just thought that was interesting that the first image we see is Pauline with the pedal
Yeah.
shower. Interestingly enough, it's Jennifer Jason Leigh's second Pauline. I was like, I know she's been called Pauline before. It was Margot at the wedding. She was Pauline also.
Oh, okay.
But it's just I knew I'd seen. I was like, I know she's played Pauline before, and I looked it up. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that they start the film on her in that pedal shower, and I don't even know what I think that means, but it's just interesting that.
I did find that interesting too. And I especially was like, did they shoot this? Was this like an afterthought? Not in a bad way, but was this to be kind of give her character some sort of, even though it's not really a happy ending, but so you can kind of see the innocence of this character and the beauty of
Hmm.
the character because she really is having a rough time
Yeah,
throughout. And she just is very sad and depressed for most of it, apart from when she's spending time with her sister. But for most of it, she's kind of just sad about the man she's seeing, and she's in this weird apartment, and
having to go to
we don't
court
know.
for
Yeah.
restraining order. Yeah, a lot of bad stuff.
I hope that maybe it was just like the thought of giving her some sort of levity
Yeah, that
in
might
the
be it.
film so that maybe when you rewatch it, you're like, oh, okay,
Yeah, right.
she does have a happiness, happy moment at
Yeah,
some
at least
point
they
in
gave
her
her
life.
something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it is interesting opening. I do like that opening a lot. I think
Hmm.
it's good, and it's good to contrast for the rest of the film. Oh, one of the last things I want to talk about was now getting into the last scene when at this point she thinks that Malloy's done it because he has her charm that was at her sister's place in his pocket because he's a creep. Like he's so weird. Sometimes some of the choices he made, I was like, what are you doing, man? And he's being so sketchy about the response to it. And she essentially, at this moment, she's calculating, how do I get out of this situation? And how do I get to the cops to say that he's the one who did it? She ties him to a pole. She has sex with him because she knows that'll get him to just relax a bit.
Hmm.
And after that, she leaves and keeps him chained to the pipe in her apartment. And she comes across Rodriguez, who at this point realizes she's too far deep in it and he needs to get rid of her. And he brings her to the lighthouse and they have their showdown, essentially. At that point, I just was like, well, she's done for. Like, I don't know how she's going to make it out of this, forgetting that she had taken Malloy's gun.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then I want to get into the very final shot of this film. But how do you feel about that ending? Because that's when it sort of really becomes that thriller aspect in those like 10 minutes of the film where there's
Yeah.
a very different shift in tone.
It is interesting, like the way he responds to her finding the charms in her pocket, his pocket, is so sketchy. He's like, oh, yeah, I meant to give those to you. I found them.
Yeah.
Like he just seems like like he's lying. I mean, it's so obvious. You're just like, okay, well, he did it. I mean, that's it. And so you're on board with her. And then, yeah, when she gets in with Rodriguez and he takes her so far away to the lighthouse, because like I didn't know where it was, so I looked it up. It's like above Harlem. It's like all the way up
Oh,
the
no.
George Washington Bridge. Like he drives her the length of Manhattan to the lighthouse, which also begs the question how she gets home. I guess we're supposed to assume one of the cars does pick her up eventually and takes her all the way across Manhattan. But yeah, that is and it is kind of clever the way she's like puts on the coat because she's cold, has the gun. That is, and that's weird when he's like, it's so weird. Like he closes the gate, locks it, and then he kind of like lets her roam around free. He's like, we're both in here. You're in here. You're gonna have to stay here for several days because people know that I left. Like he's not. I don't know. It's kind of weird how she has freedom in the lighthouse, but not really. She can kind of wander around by herself. He's like offering her wine and stuff. He's like, yeah, sorry, don't cry. I mean, you're gonna have to be here a few days, and I'll come back and kill you. It's like, oh my god. And
I
I
shouldn't
think that
laugh,
they.
but
No, yeah, yeah. I think it is. I think the way they do it is good because it, like you said, it doesn't have to. They have to amp things up a little bit in that moment, but it doesn't become too over melodramatic or like too. It feels kind of in line with how things are happening in the movie. The only thing that doesn't is the second gunshot and then the shot of him above her with the. That feels like another movie, kind of like, oh, there was another gunshot. Oh, she did kill him. Yeah, yeah, and she gets to crawl out from underneath him. I don't know. That felt a little like more standard thriller for me, but I do like the shot of her coming back. And then, well, you see, you want to talk about the final shot, but I thought it was interesting the way that they, when they do have to amp it up for the thriller genre to wrap things up. I did like the way they did, and I thought that scene with her in the lighthouse with Rodriguez, they both did a good job acting those scenes. I felt like it was realistic. Yeah.
no, for sure. I also thought the second shot was weird too, both times. And then I'm like, maybe this is a studio interference where they're like, well, people need to know that he died. So we had to add that second shot.
Yep, definitely feels that way.
Those studios always thinking people are stupid.
Yeah.
But the final shot when she gets back into her apartment, Malloy's on the ground because at this point he's been tied up there for however long. He's been tied up. The first time I watched this, I was like, okay, well, he's tied up there, so he's obviously peed himself, and that's why all the water is there. But I was like, is it that, or did he like break a part of the pipe and that's leaking? I still think because the movie's so gross a lot of the times that it is just his urine, and then she's just lying next to this urine. That's how I was like, she would end the movie this way. I don't know how you feel, because then I was doubting myself afterwards.
I thought it was the pipe, but
yeah.
But that's funny to think about. That I mean, I don't. Maybe you never know. I mean, you never know because it is kind of
a mix of both.
A grimy. Maybe it's both. Yeah. Either way, it's weird that she lays down in the water. She shouldn't have to do that, but or whatever the liquid is, didn't have to lay in it. But that is funny to think about, though, that maybe it was because you know what? If he had busted the pipe open, he probably wouldn't be there anymore. So he would have been able to get the handcuff off. So maybe he did pee himself.
That's what I thought, because I was like, he would have, been, unless it didn't fully break, just a part of it broke and like it's leaking that way. And it's probably what it is. But the first time I was like, oh my God, she went through all that and now she's lying in his urine with him.
And that is so much pee. That'd be so much pee.
Yeah.
That'd be a lot of pee. That's a huge bottle.
Yeah. I was like, it's definitely, I feel like there's a mix of both because there's no way he's holding it in that long.
A little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah. But I think it's a great ending to the film, and I don't think you can really end it despite the fact that we both said, yeah, the ending in the book is different, but I think it works for this film. At least for me, it does.
They'll continue on having their strange relationship where they just continue to circle each other, try to feel each other out, and then occasionally get too aggressive, and then occasionally find themselves on the same wavelength. It's just, there's a mixture of, but I was interested, I was thinking that she handcuffs him to the chair, to the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
She has sex with him. I thought maybe I had the order wrong. I thought that she found the charm after, I thought she wanted to do that. And then she got scared, or did she know it was him before? And then she was just trying to calm him down. Like you said, I may have that. I couldn't remember the order. So I was wondering what her motivation was with the sex part.
Yeah.
Like, maybe she was trying to just like keep him calm. I didn't think about that. I thought she like kind of wanted to have sex with him, but then found out. I'm not sure. It's weird though. Like either way, it's an interesting choice either way. However they did it.
She might have found the charm after though. Now I'm like doubting myself on that.
I can't rember which, but
I think it's a mix of both. Either
yeah,
way,
you're right.
I think she still thought it was him, and she was just trying to. I think she did want to have sex with him.
And the tattoo, she definitely thinks it's him because of the tattoo and all that stuff.
Exactly.
She's thinking
Yeah.
it the whole time, really, like in the back of her head the whole time. She's like, well, what? And then there's that one scene after Pauline's dead where he's like, I have the key, I can get back in. She goes, did you kill? And
Yeah.
he's like, get her out of here. He's just so done with her at that point. He's like, get her out of here.
I like how she just keeps asking him outright.
Yeah. She really does. Like, yeah, he's like, I've never been to that club. And she's like, swear you weren't there. Like, she's just so accusatory of him. And he's like, I just didn't do it. And she's like, okay, but you did, right?
I mean, I really don't blame her because he's being
Mm-mm.
so sketched the whole time.
Yeah, he's not reassuring at all. Yeah.
No.
Mm-mm.
Like, maybe change your tactic a bit if you want to make her believe for even 1 second that it wasn't you.
Yeah.
Are there any of the parts of the film that we haven't covered that you want to chat about?
Que Sera opens the movie. That reminds me of Heathers.
Yes.
The classic Que Sera beginning. There were just some good, like some of the lines, like you were talking about the writing earlier. I just like some of the way the lines are written, especially the conversations between Pauline and Franny. Like early in the movie when they're first walking together, and she's like, Pauline goes, "Are you happy when you wake up?" And Franny goes, "No." Then they just move on to a different topic. Like it's just some of those.
Yeah.
And when he says his line that I won't repeat about women giving oral sex. I already said blowjob this thing. I don't know why I'm being weird now. But anyway, when he says that line about, and then she repeats the line. Like she's upset. She's drunk. She goes, oh, that's a good phrase. Sense of C word.
Yeah.
Like I just think it's interesting how she's still always kind of in that mode of a writer, but English. I like the detail of how she has those little words all over her door and like the magnetized words that, like my roommate used to have where you could like make sentences out of them on the fridge. That is an interesting detail because she would be the kind of person who would have, words everywhere. And it's, like you said, she writes down on the post-it notes all the phrases she like. I like that they include that detail of her noticing phrases in everyday life that she's like, oh yeah, I like that. It kind of adds for a fuller character.
It does. I think it's a really good choice to do that because you're like, you have to remember that this woman does have a job and a life outside of what's happening.
Yeah.
Right in this moment.
Yeah. And then there's one line she says where I don't think memory is very reliable. It's when she's getting questioned in the police station. They're like, do you think you have a good memory? She's like, I don't think memory is very reliable. There's just a lot of good lines in this movie, like interesting lines that make you think. The last thing I would say that I think is weird is that they released this movie on Halloween.
Did they?
Yeah. And that like almost sinks it even further because it's not, I can imagine, I haven't seen the trailer. I imagine I know exactly what the trailer is. They make it look like,
oh yeah,
she only has one chance to fight for her life. That sort of thing. And then like coming Halloween, and then people go see it and expect a horror movie with a guy cutting people, and that's not what's in the movie. It's sort of what it's about, but it's not in the movie. So I imagine that didn't help either, the Halloween release date of 2000.
Yeah, the poster too, because I always remembered seeing the poster and thinking it was like a horror thriller.
Yeah.
Just with that like red font and you kind of see like half her face type of deal that you would have seen a lot in that time. Halloween's an interesting choice release date for this one.
I don't know when the right time is to release this movie, but
I almost think like Valentine's Day would be funny.
Yeah, actually. Yeah. I like that too. They missed the boat doing that they should have done that for Gone Girl also.
Yeah, I know.
So I didn't notice the first time I watched it because I didn't know where the movie was going. The second time I noticed a lot of lighthouse imagery throughout the movie.
Yeah.
The book they're reading or the poem they're reading in class. And then there's a red lighthouse on the police desk, which now that I think about it would be Rodriguez's desk. So that makes sense why he'd have it. Actually, that's stupid of him to have a red lighthouse on his desk. What does he do? He's like telegraphing for everybody what's going to happen. That word disarticulated. They bring them when he's trying to describe what happened to her. Something about that word gives me the creeps. Like it's a good. I'm glad they chose that to describe it because it just fits in somehow. It fits like a puzzle piece with the rest of the movie. You're like, yeah, that makes sense that it's a complicated, weird word. Yeah.
I think just the writing is. I know we've been saying this, but the writing is really strong in this movie. That really elevates everyone else's performances and the look of the film. I love that aspect that's running through the film. But I didn't even notice the lighthouse on his desk. I'd have to see it now. The next time I watch it, I'll definitely be like, okay, there it is.
Yeah, it's like a real quick shot at the very beginning when she's about to look at all the pictures of the people. There's a quick shot. I was like, I don't know why I didn't think about it at the time. I was like, that's really dumb of him to have a lighthouse on it.
That's funny. He's not the smartest.
No,
obviously.
no.
Well, I think that's in the cut. I think we covered it pretty well. I gonna move to the last portion of the show, which we'll still talk about in the cut a bit and Jane Campion, but same questions I ask everyone. And the first one is the starter film question. So I know you've seen a good number of her films because I think you said that you saw five, but she doesn't have that many. Like she's got a good maybe I want to say like 10 features at this point and quite a few shorts, but so five is a good number to have seen. So if someone were to ask you for a recommendation on where to start in her filmography, what film would you recommend and what's the reasoning behind that?
I think I would say The Piano, just because
Yeah.
I want somebody to start with like a undeniably great movie that like you almost
Yeah.
can't dislike. I guess people do dislike The Piano, but I don't know them and I don't want to know them. But
Yeah.
but it's good, and I feel like it's just a good encapsulation of a lot of themes she revisits a lot, and it's got a great female protagonist, which is important to a lot of Campion's films, and it's just beautiful and like very involving, and like it just sweeps you up in a way that a lot of movies don't. And I guess maybe because it's personally the one that got me into it, maybe that's why I pick it. But I just think like I specifically would not pick this one to get into. And I would not pick Holy Smoke either. I would pick one that's accessible seems like a not a complimentary word, but I don't even know. It's just I think it's maybe like the reach of it can it's got
Hmm.
more. It doesn't even have broad appeal. Everything I'm saying sounds like an insult. It's a movie that more like everyone will love. I don't know, like
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's a good way to get into her aesthetic and the way she likes to make films and her rhythm.
I think that's the best way to put it. I think when I'm usually recommending a film, if someone specifically wants to watch a film from a specific director, I'm like, what is going to show you exactly what they have to offer? And yes, they might do other things throughout their career, but this is the exact, when you think of Jane Campion, you always think of The Piano, and that's what I would recommend too, because from there, again, I think it would be really difficult for someone not to like The Piano, and then I just don't know what you wouldn't like about The Piano, but then
Yeah.
something like In the Cut, it's like I think you need to have watched a couple before you get into In the
Yeah.
Cut. Holy smoke! You should be able to. You can start depending on the person. You can start anywhere, but I'd always recommend The Piano. I think.
The one that I wanted to watch that I didn't get a chance to watch was Bright Star. I've never seen it, and I've heard great things. Is it
Yes.
great? Okay, I need to watch it. I might
Yeah.
watch it tonight.
That's the second one I would recommend to go
Okay.
from there. I think that you'd like it a lot. It shocked me because it had been on my list for so long and I eventually got around to it not even that long ago. I did it for prep. I'm not covering it, but I wanted to watch the ones I hadn't seen. And Bright Star was like, oh my God, it's so heartbreaking but so beautiful.
Oh yeah, I gotta watch
I
it.
think you'll like it a lot. It was so good. It's just so well performed. And like then you get back to like the beautiful landscape Campion, not the grimy
Yeah.
Campion. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be my second recommendation after The Piano. That's a great one.
I'm excited to see it.
Second question is a double bill, and you can give me more than one film if you want to. But if you're going to pair this film with another film to create a double bill, which film would you pair it with, and what's the reasoning behind that pairing?
Okay, so my triple bill is In the Cut, and because I want a detective story that takes its time and is not solely all the time about the detective aspect or the crime aspect. The Long Goodbye, Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye.
Mm,
I feel like they're cousins in the way that they have prickly protagonists who are sort of fumbling their way through a bad
yeah.
situation, is I guess how I'd put that. And then the third movie I'd have is Bound.
Okay.
The reason why is because I feel like they're sort of cousins in the sense of having sex scenes that are from the female perspective. They're
Hmm.
not, even though, yeah, they're basically, they don't feel like they're from the male gaze, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think the right way to say it. They're just very in tune with, I would say, the emotionality of what's happening in the sex and like it's just very, I feel like they're kind of beautiful sex scenes in a way, and they're not supposed to be like overly like the Basic Instinct style like titillation and things like that. They serve the story, and they're just interesting in a way that most aren't, especially from Hollywood movies. So
Hmm.
that's sort of how I would tie those all together, I think.
No, I think that's great. I hadn't even thought of The Long Goodbye, but when you said it, I was like, yeah, yes, 100%.
I'm a big Altman guy. That one, I love that movie so much.
Yeah, same. I like Altman. I obviously love Elliot Gould. So I'm always pro The Long Goodbye. I rewatched it last year and I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I was like, oh man, this movie is just so good.
So good, yeah.
The ones that I would pair it with, and I've used this pairing before for another film, but it's still kind of fitting for this one, which is Richard Brooks Looking for Mr. Goodbar with Diane Keaton. She's also a teacher and she lives a bit of a risky life. And I can't imagine that they didn't watch that film as inspiration as well for this, because that's also based on a true story, that one. It's also a New York film. It's dark, but there's moments of levity, but then it gets real serious, and it's a really great. I think you'd like it a lot, actually.
I've never seen it. I've heard of it, but yeah, I need to watch that one too.
It's really good. It parallels really well with this one. They both kind of very similar characters who obviously missing something why they're putting themselves, or they end up in these situations that are not ones that you would expect them to be in.
Yeah.
So I think those would be. And then I thought of another one, which is a film that is quite traumatic for me. And I don't know that I'd want to watch this double bill, but if you're looking for like a trauma session for some reason, I'd recommend Fat Girl, which is Catherine Breillat, and the French film. And it's very dark and just shows, again, it's different violence towards women. It's not very overt. It's not always physical, but just like the depths of like verbal violence towards people and just the lens of being told through the eyes of a woman is very interesting. It's a hard movie to watch. I'd say it's much harder than In the Cut to watch because it involves a younger girl and you just feel really bad for it. So I would not want to do that double bill myself, but others might be into that type of vibe. So those would be the ones I'd recommend for that.
I've heard of Fat Girl. I've never seen it, but I've heard of it. I remember it had like really good reviews when it came out, and it's always been sort of on my radar. But yeah, I still haven't seen it. I think it's maybe on Criterion. I'll have to look it
up. It is.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still on the channel. I think it is actually. I know it's a release, a Criterion release. It's like an early one, and it was on the channel for a long time because every time it would sometimes come up on the feed, and I'd be like, "Oh God, not Fat Girl."
Stop recommending this to me.
Yeah, I was like, "I've seen it. I'm good.
I'm good."
Yeah. So those would be the ones, but. Scott, thank you so much for joining me for In the Cut. I thought we had a great discussion. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun. I'm glad I got to see it again, and always happy to talk movies. So yeah, this has been great.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Roney, with intro music by the Mark Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on The Power of the Dog.